They did use arsenic bombs. The British used arsenic bombs against the Bolsheviks in 1919, although they deserved it. But it is true that the Spanish did use mustard gas against the Moroccans in 1925, and the Italians against the Ethiopians, who were of course Christians.
Oh, pardon me. Okay.
In 1937.
All right.
Just a little.
Okay, thank you. Yes.
Oh, but by, say, the end of World War II, were people thinking bombers are becoming obsolete, we can hit them with missiles, like the V2? Or do you think that the V2 was not very effective?
The V2s and the V1s were not really aimed very well. I mean, they were essentially terror weapons. They were hitting localities, and so at the point of the end of World War II, they weren't really considering them as as serious weapons if you're trying to hit something smaller than a major metropolitan area.
V2s killed about one person per missile.
Oh, not cost effective.
Not very effective. Yeah.
Yeah, hi. Just looking at this, though, how does this all fit in with the immediate post-World War I writings of Dewey, Billy
I'm
Mitchell,
glad you brought up
and the theory of air power, which was really their purpose, or their stated purpose, was terror bombing would limit the horrors of the Western Front.
Yeah.
And so I'm just wondering how this all fits in, because that's it's contemporaneous with that.
Yeah. I'm not sure how to respond to that because I'm looking at I'm not looking, say, at strategic bombing per se, but I'm looking at kind of ideas that were off the wall for World War I, and that were not accomplished during World War I. Duhay's theories were very influential, particularly among Americans. The American military between the wars, and there was nothing about them that was science fiction like, which is kind of some of the stuff that I'm talking about. So I'm sorry, I'm not really.
Well, there is one connection, and that is, I mean, Dewey absolutely advocates using poison gas, and that was a big part of his idea of strategic bombing. And he certainly got the idea in World War I. I mean, the idea is obvious. And Dewey, I don't know if he ever advocated it during the war. He was active during most of the war when he wasn't under arrest. But but the book, which was very influential, and really led to the B-17 program and everything. The original idea was to drop poison gas on civilians for humane purposes.
That was also Hugh Trenchard's idea.
What's that?
Hugh Trenchard, not Hugh Trenchard, but
Yes.
Bomber Harris.
He
wanted to bomb the civilians because that was
the idea was that they would be so terrified. But that comes out actually, like you were saying.
Yeah.
The idea of the Zeppelin and Gotha raids being very successful becomes part of the mythology of World War I, although it's not really true, and that does lead to this idea that if you bomb civilians, they'll surrender, which leads directly to Harris and LeMay and the whole idea of
it never did prove out to be the case.
Can I elaborate on that? Because there's some interesting stuff from World War I that sheds light on that. There were, with the Zeppelin bombings, particularly in 1915, the Zeppelin bombings resulted in riots in East London and in the port city of Hull, which actually is where the Suddabys are from, so I've done a fair amount of research there. They had riots in those places, and generally speaking, they were against shop owners who had foreign-sounding, perhaps German names. So the bombing early on, 1915, led to riots. That put the seed of the idea in people's heads that if you can bomb cities, the country will just descend into chaos. By September and October 1917, when the Germans switched their Gotha bombers, the twin-engine airplanes flying from occupied Belgium, when they switched those from day bombing to night bombing, there was about a week and a half where they were hitting London almost every day. I think it was about the end of September 1917. And they were having, people were doing things like they would just go down into the subway tunnels to sleep, even though they didn't know whether the bombers were coming yet, because they hit them so many times in succession. And there were problems controlling the crowds because everybody wanted to be down in the subway tunnels, but they did not have rioting. And they didn't have the civil unrest that they had seen in 1915. And so in World War I, by the end of 1917, you had evidence that said the population won't panic with under-sustained bombing. But the people who were looking at strategic bombing as a possible strategy didn't think of that, ignored it, discounted it, something or other, and they looked back to the riots of 1915, which really stuck in their memory, and so made it look like strategic bombing of civilians is a very desirable thing that you can knock a country out of.
I heard that the Japanese used biological weapons against the Chinese, but I don't know if that was true.
That is true.
That they
Yeah,
did drop.
they used anthrax and plague from the air.
They did it on the ground too. A lot of it, they put poison in the food, and their troops are inoculated. They watch the villagers go, and that's how they calculate how effective it would be in warfare. Because they were going to drop plague germs on the west coast
Yeah.
here.
They actually did bomb the West Coast
Yeah.
with incendiary bombs,
Yeah.
with balloons. They discovered the jet stream,
Yeah, we're not in
and they were planning on dropping plague bombs, but they never.
At the end of World War II, we did a strategic bombing survey of Germany, and they discovered that German war production actually increased up to the end of the war. That the strategic bombing we did not slow down German war production, it actually increased right up to the very end.
They moved the factories underground.
Yeah,
Right.
and they
Well, I'm not
spread
saying-
them out.
I'm not saying-
Yeah.
but-
that was one of the mythologies, because
Right.
people thought because the factories were concentrated, you could bomb them all in one place. But of course, they didn't consider the obvious thing, which was to spread the factories out.
That's sort of a misnomer, because producing an aircraft gets destroyed as soon as it's rolled out and completed, or it doesn't have any fuel which the fighting is useless.
Yeah, we're still
Well,
fighting
that's
the strategic
true.
air
Yeah.
war.
Yeah.
Yeah, in the back there.
Oh, yeah, about attacking the Kaiser, or trying to kill the Kaiser. What was the rationale for going after him instead of saying on Hindenburg and Ludendorff or their predecessors? Because after all, they ran the army and not really the Kaiser. He was more or less a figurehead.
That's a good question. Yeah, why kill the Kaiser? He wasn't really doing anything.
It's symbolic.
I think the Kaiser was a big target, and he was viewed with great hatred by everyone in the Allied countries, and as the person who was responsible for World War I. And so I think it was. I think you're right. It would have made a bigger impact if they had gotten Hindenburg or Ludendorff, or better yet, both of them. But I think the Kaiser was just too visible as a target, and that was what they went after.
It was symbolic.
The lady in the back here. Yes, please.
Yeah, how did they float these World War I Zeppelins?
The World War I Zeppelins had an aluminum alloy structure, a superstructure, and they had inside them cells that contained hydrogen gas. And so it was the hydrogen gas inside the cells, inside the structure of that piece that I passed around. I hope it's still in the room. And so it was hydrogen gas that they were using to lift them.
What were the cells made of?
The cells, good question. The cells were made of what's called gold beater skin. It was essentially the intestines of cows, because it was impermeable, kind of like rubber. Except the thing was, because it was organic, they could take more than one and they could stick them together, and it would get a good seal, so they wouldn't leak. And so you could have something bigger than the size of a cow's intestine, and you could make large sheets of them and large bags of them.
Yeah, I saw a program about that on Channel 9, and I thought they said it took 250,000 cows to float one Zeppelin.
That would not surprise me at all. No.
But they gave their lives willingly.
He's passed away now, Douglas Robinson.
Oh, yes, Douglas Robinson's book, The Zeppelin in Combat, is still the best book on the German Zeppelin raids on England. Yeah, I mean, it's one of those classics that probably will never be surpassed.
I want to put in another little plug. The story is that Zeppelin, he was an observer in the Civil War, and that he got the idea from generals from below. I don't think it was the general, the head of the Union Aeronautics Division. But in fact, the first practical dirigible was invented by a Jewish guy, David Schwartz, who was very oddly completely uneducated. I don't know where he got the idea, but he actually traveled to France. He sold his idea to the French army, and he met with Zeppelin, and then he died, and Zeppelin came out with his plan shortly thereafter. So we think that he stole the idea, but it's not really clear.
Did he have an idea for hot air balloons?
No. This was exactly what Zeppelin came up with. These were hydrogen-filled dirigible balloons that he invented that were practical and actually were flown. So, but he died shortly after introducing them to the French. So it never. Yeah, it was kind of like that Philo T. Farnsworth thing. He didn't get any credit. Okay. Anyway, other questions? All right. Well, thank you very much, everyone, and thank our speakers. This is actually the 19th year that I've been doing this. Well, actually, we skipped a year, so it's the 18th year. And I have to say, I really think this is the best group of speakers that we've had. And I really appreciate it.